Something about the whole scene felt unsettling. Amanda picked up on it, too. She got this odd expression, like she was trying to recall something important but couldn't quite place it. "Have we met before?" Amanda asked politely, extending her hand with her usual gracious charm. Sharon just stood there, staring for several awkward seconds, before finally giving what might have been the weakest handshake in history. "I don't think so," Sharon answered, but her tone carried a sharpness that didn't fit the first meeting. When Sharon left, Amanda lingered by the window, watching her walk away. I asked what that strange interaction was about, but Amanda only shook her head slowly, like she was puzzling over something just out of reach. "She seems familiar," she admitted, "but I can't figure out where I've seen her. Maybe a grocery store, or a coffee shop." I could tell it bothered her more than she was letting on. Amanda never forgets a face, and the look in her eyes told me this wasn't casual recognition. It was like she was chasing a memory that refused to surface. A few weeks later, we took a short trip to visit Amanda's family in Oklahoma. The visit was wonderful, relaxing, cheerful, exactly what we needed. We came home refreshed and happy. That peace didn't last long. The moment we pulled into our driveway, we spotted a bright yellow violation notice slapped onto our front door like some kind of public shaming. I couldn't imagine what we'd done wrong while being out of town. The fine was $85 for grass that supposedly measured 3.4 inches when the rulebook said it couldn't exceed 3.0. Who on earth actually measures grass with a ruler? And more importantly, who has that much time to obsess over someone else's lawn? What made it even stranger was the way Sharon handled it. Instead of mailing the citation like any normal HOA president, she delivered it herself, scribbled a nasty personal note on the back, and according to our neighbor Mrs. Peterson, who sees absolutely everything, stood on our porch for nearly 10 minutes photographing our lawn from every possible angle like she was collecting evidence for a criminal trial. Amanda's reaction was the first real clue that something about her wasn't quite what I had always assumed. Instead of paying the $85 and moving on, she sat at the kitchen table, studying the notice like it was a federal contract. She pulled out her laptop, opened a stack of browser tabs, and began jotting notes on the legal pad with the kind of laser focus she usually reserved for major work projects. "This is procedurally flawed," she muttered, highlighting sections with different colored pens. "The timing of the notice violates Texas property code, and there's no documented measurement according to state guidelines." I stood there watching my cookie-baking wife transform into a sharp, precise legal strategist overnight. "Honey," I asked carefully, "where exactly are you learning all this law stuff? From consulting?" She looked up, her face completely focused, radiating confidence I'd never seen before. "No, this isn't about the $85, she said firmly, her tone like steel. "It's about due process and legal procedure. This woman has already broken several sections of property law, and I'm not letting it slide." I had no clue what due process had to do with the height of grass, but something in her voice told me not to argue. The way she spoke sounded far too polished, too professional, for someone who just worked from home. That's when Sharon's behavior escalated from annoying to downright disturbing. When she realized Amanda wasn't going to back down, she lost control. Suddenly, Sharon was driving by our house several times a day, slowing down to glare at the property as if she were running surveillance. Mrs. Peterson mentioned that Sharon had even been asking odd questions about what cars we drove, how we afforded our home, whether we seemed suspicious. What unnerved me most, though, was the way Sharon looked at Amanda. It wasn't ordinary hoe irritation, it was raw, personal, like Amanda embodied something Sharon despised but couldn't put into words. And Amanda? She remained calm, professional, almost unnervingly patient, when most people would have told Sharon exactly where to shove her ruler. Amanda's calmness had shifted into something almost unnerving. It wasn't just patience anymore, it was a kind of cold judicial composure that unsettled me. People in the neighborhood were starting to notice the tension, too. During evening walks, I could feel the whispers, see the glances. At first, a few neighbors sided with Sharon. Rules are rules, after all. But others, like the Robinsons and old Mr. Green, saw that Sharon was taking things to extremes over what was clearly a one-time violation that happened while we weren't even home. Sharon's response was what finally convinced me that this wasn't about rules at all. She decided Amanda needed to be put in her place, though she couldn't explain why she felt such a personal need to break her down. It wasn't about HOA regulations anymore, it was about some warped battle she had built in her head. A few days after the first fine, I found Amanda in her home office late at night. Legal documents and case files were scattered around her desk, the kind of material that had nothing to do with her usual consulting work. When I asked, she shut her laptop quickly and claimed she was just looking into HOA regulations, but I'd already seen enough. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of an old newspaper clipping. It was from 8 years ago. The headline described a major charity fraud case, and there was a photo of a woman leaving a courthouse. The image was grainy, but something about her face looked eerily familiar. Amanda stared at it before glancing out the window toward Sharon's house across the street, unsettled, whispering almost to herself, "Why does she feel so familiar? And why does she make me feel this uneasy?" Sharon's obsession with Amanda soon reached a terrifying new level. She actually hired a private investigator, paying nearly $400 out of pocket to dig into Amanda's background. Imagine being so consumed by hate for a neighbor that you pay someone to snoop on them. The report, of course, came back spotless. Amanda wasn't running some secret operation from our suburban home. She was simply living her life. But when Sharon read that Amanda was described as a successful legal professional with an expensive lifestyle, something inside her snapped. Those words, "a successful legal professional," echoed in her head like a trigger she couldn't explain. Mrs. Peterson even overheard Sharon pacing in her backyard late at night, muttering those words again and again. The PI report seemed to dig at some old wound, unleashing anger she couldn't rationalize. She told her sister over the phone that Amanda reminded her of the type who thinks they're better than everyone else, the type who ruins people's lives for a career. But when her sister pressed her to be specific, Sharon couldn't give an answer. All she knew was that women like Amanda filled her with rage. Meanwhile, my wife was handling Sharon's constant escalation with a cool professionalism that should have told me everything. After the second fine, Sharon delivered a third just days later. This time it was $275, citing repeated violations and administrative costs. Then came a fourth notice, with a $425 penalty for property maintenance endangerment, a term that didn't even seem real. Each delivery became more aggressive, more confrontational, as though Sharon was desperate to provoke Amanda into losing control. But Amanda never cracked. She read each notice carefully, annotating it with legal codes and referencing precedents with the precision of someone who had been trained for years. When I asked where this expertise came from, she insisted it was part of her consulting work, something to do with regulatory compliance. That explanation might have satisfied me once, but now I was paying closer attention. She wasn't just reading HOA bylaws, she was citing constitutional clauses and federal property codes that no ordinary homeowner would know. One evening, I overheard her on a call that definitely didn't sound like ordinary consulting. "Yes, I'll need the harassment precedents from the Miller case," she said in a low voice, "and pull anything we have on intimidation tactics involving repeat offenders." The moment she noticed me listening, she hung up fast and brushed it off, claiming it was just routine research. But I knew better. Amanda brushed it off as research for a client project, but the way she used the phrase repeat offenders sent a chill down my spine. Who even talks like that unless they've spent time in criminal law? The breaking point came at our monthly home meeting in the community center. Watching my quiet, cookie-baking wife tear down Sharon's authority piece by piece was like realizing Superman had been sitting across from me at the dinner table for years. Amanda walked in with a folder in her hands and a confidence I'd never seen before. When she stood up during the open forum, it was like a switch flipped. The gentle, soft-spoken woman I knew was gone, replaced by someone with a commanding presence that silenced the entire room. According to Texas Property Code, Section 2114, she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall, violation notices must provide sufficient opportunity for correction before escalating into penalties. She flipped through her notes effortlessly, citing precedents and even constitutional protections as if she'd memorized the entire legal framework. Furthermore, The Fourth Amendment's Due Process Clause requires property enforcement actions to follow established procedure. These notices fail to meet that standard. Every single person stared at her like she'd started speaking an alien language. Sharon's reaction, though, was unforgettable. As Amanda continued, her expression shifted from confusion, to realization, to fear, then finally to raw rage. She shook her head, muttering, "Number, no," under her breath, as though Amanda's calm authority was unearthing some terrible memory she'd tried to bury. When Amanda casually referenced her experience with federal court proceedings, Sharon audibly gasped. Her knuckles went white as she gripped the table, like she might snap the wood in half. After the meeting, I watched her sit in her car for nearly 20 minutes, staring at our house through her windshield. Mrs. Peterson later said Sharon looked like she was having a breakdown, pacing inside her car, yelling at her phone, even screaming with the windows rolled up. That night, Mrs. Peterson overheard Sharon pacing in her backyard, her voice carrying through the neighborhood as she spoke to her sister on the phone. "That voice," she kept repeating, "that authoritative voice when she talks about the law. I know that voice. It ruined my life." She spit out phrases like federal court proceedings and professional capacity as if they were poison. By the next morning, Sharon's paranoia had consumed her. Even her old supporters began questioning her sanity. She shadowed Amanda's routine like a stalker, recording the times she left and came home, who she spoke to, what she bought. In Sharon's mind, Amanda couldn't simply be a consultant with legal expertise. She had to be running some kind of con. How else, Sharon insisted, could she afford the clothes, the car, the house? She started spreading wild rumors and whispers about money laundering, tax evasion, hidden schemes. But her biggest mistake was failing to notice how her own behavior had become the real red flag. The Robinsons cut ties completely after she cornered Mr. Robinson at the mailbox, demanding if he'd noticed anything suspicious at our place. Old Mr. Green told me she had asked him to keep a log of every visitor to our home, which creeped him out so badly he refused to talk to her again. Even the neighbors who had initially rallied around her grass crusade were now backing away, convinced Sharon had lost her grip. Meanwhile, Amanda had quietly shifted into investigator mode herself. At night, I'd find her on her laptop, supposedly working on projects. But the tabs she had open looked like legal archives and criminal databases. One evening, I saw her pull out that same old newspaper clipping of the courthouse photo of the woman who looked eerily like Sharon. This time, she was holding it side by side with a current HOA directory photo, comparing the two with the focus of someone piecing together an 8-year-old mystery. Later that night, as we got ready for bed, Amanda finally turned to me and asked, "Noah, do you think people can change their appearance so much that you wouldn't recognize them after years, especially if you weren't expecting to see them again?" You said, "I want you to rewrite this script without changing the story of script. You can change wording to make it unique and write timeline in this script. I will give you script in section wise. Remember story mod jiz jagapa echo stories lika iga apneas ko ana drama nest say change karna hi ager only echo lika hoga aski jagapana likna hi." ChatGPT said, "Got it, Teo. You'll give me the script section by section, and I'll rewrite each part in fresh wording while keeping the story the same. I'll also make sure, echo stories ana drama nest, echo, alone, ana, no timestamps included. Story remains unchanged, just rewritten uniquely. Send me the first section and I'll start rewriting." You said, 136 something equally horrible. Amanda noticed it, too. She got this strange look on her face, like she was trying to 142 remember something important, but couldn't quite place it. "Have we met before?" Amanda asked politely, 148 extending her hand like the gracious woman she is. Sharon just stared at it for like 5 uncomfortable seconds, 154 before giving the weakest handshake in human history. "I don't think so," Sharon 159 replied, but her voice had this edge to it that was completely inappropriate for a first meeting. After Sharon left, 205 Amanda stood at the window watching her walk away, and I asked what that weird interaction was all about. "I don't know." 212 she said, shaking her head slowly like she was trying to solve some impossible puzzle. "Something about her feels 218 familiar, but I can't figure out where I might have seen her before, maybe at a coffee shop or grocery store, but I 225 could tell it was bothering her more than she was letting on. Amanda's not the type to forget faces, and there was something in her expression that 231 suggested this wasn't just casual recognition. It was like she was trying to remember something important, but the 237 memory was just out of reach. 3 weeks later, we went on this nice HOA vacation to visit Amanda's family up in 244 Oklahoma. We had a wonderful time, completely relaxed, and came home feeling refreshed and happy. That 250 peaceful feeling lasted exactly 30 seconds after we pulled into our driveway. There was this bright yellow 256 violation notice stuck to our front door like a scarlet letter, and I'm thinking, what the hell could we have possibly 302 violated while we were completely out of state? The fine was $485. Apparently, 307 our grass was 3.4 in tall when the HOA regulation clearly stated it couldn't. 313 exceed 3.0 inches. I'm standing there reading this ridiculous thing, and I'm 318 thinking, who the hell measures grass with a ruler? What kind of person has that much time on their hands? And that 324 much obsession with other people's lawn maintenance? But here's where it gets really weird. Sharon didn't just mail 330 this fine like a normal HOA president would. She personally delivered it. Hand 335 wrote a nasty note on the back, and according to our neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, who sees absolutely 340 everything, she stood on our porch for like 10 minutes taking photos of our lawn from different angles like she was 347 documenting a crime scene. Amanda's reaction to this fine was what really caught my attention and should have been 353, my first major clue that my wife wasn't exactly who I thought she was. Instead of just paying the stupid $85 and moving 4 o'clock on like any reasonable person would, she sat down at our kitchen table and started reading this violation notice 406 like it was the Constitution of the United States. She pulled out her laptop, opened multiple browser tabs, 412, and started taking notes on a legal pad with the kind of focused intensity I had only seen her use for really important 418 work projects. This is procedurally flawed, she muttered, highlighting sections with different colored pens. 424 like she was preparing for some kind of legal battle. The notification timing violates Texas Property Code Section 430-2114, and there's no evidence of proper measurement documentation according to 436 the state regulations. I'm watching my sweet cookie baking wife transform into some kind of legal expert overnight, and 444 I'm completely confused. Honey, I said carefully, where exactly are you getting 449 all this law knowledge from your consulting work? She looked up at me with this expression I'd never seen 454 before, completely focused and absolutely confident in her expertise. 459 Noah, this isn't about the $85, she said with this authoritative tone that could 504 have frozen water. It's about due process and proper legal procedures. This woman has violated at least 511 different sections of property law, and I'm not going to let her get away with it. I had no idea what the hell due 517 process had to do with grass height, but something in her voice told me to just shut up and let her handle whatever this 523 was. The way she spoke about legal procedures sounded way too professional for someone who just did consulting work. 530 from home. That's when Sharon's behavior went from annoying to downright bizarre, and I started to realize we weren't 536 dealing with your average HOA Karen situation. When Sharon realized that Amanda wasn't going to just roll over 543 and pay the fine like a good little homeowner, something inside her completely snapped. She started driving 549 by our house 3 or 4 times a day, slowing down to stare at our property, like she was conducting some kind of 555 surveillance operation. Mrs. Peterson told me Sharon had been asking weird questions about us, what kind of cars we 601 drive, how we can afford such a nice house, and whether we seem suspicious in any way. But here's the thing that 608 really freaked me out. Every time Sharon looked at Amanda, I could see this rage building behind her eyes, not regular HOA 616 Karen anger over property violations, but something deeper and more personal. It was like Amanda represented 622 everything Sharon hated about the world, but she couldn't explain why. Her internal monologue must have been going 628 crazy. Why do I want to destroy this woman? Why does her voice make me so angry? Why do I feel like I know her 635 from somewhere terrible? And Amanda, she was being way too patient with this lunatic. Most people would have told 642 Sharon to shove her grass ruler where the sun doesn't shine, but Amanda maintained this professional. Almost 648 ChatGPT said, "Here's your rewritten version of the Section A story unchanged, wording refreshed, no timelines, and ready for the Anna-drama-nest replacements when they appear later in future sections." Something about the whole scene felt unsettling. Amanda picked up on it, too. She got this odd expression, like she was trying to recall something important but couldn't quite place it. "Have we met before?" Amanda asked politely, extending her hand with her usual gracious charm. Sharon just stood there, staring for several awkward seconds, before finally giving what might have been the weakest handshake in history. "I don't think so," Sharon answered, but her tone carried a sharpness that didn't fit a first meeting. When Sharon left, Amanda lingered by the window, watching her walk away. I asked what that strange interaction was about, but Amanda only shook her head slowly, like she was puzzling over something just out of reach. "She seems familiar," she admitted, "but I can't figure out where I've seen her. Maybe a grocery store, or a coffee shop." I could tell it bothered her more than she was letting on. Amanda never forgets a face, and the look in her eyes told me this wasn't casual recognition. It was like she was chasing a memory that refused to surface. A few weeks later, we took a short trip to visit Amanda's family in Oklahoma. The visit was wonderful, relaxing, cheerful, exactly what we needed. We came home refreshed and happy. That peace didn't last long. The moment we pulled into our driveway, we spotted a bright yellow violation notice slapped onto our front door like some kind of public shaming. I couldn't imagine what we'd done wrong while being out of town. The fine was $85 for grass that supposedly measured 3.4 inches when the rulebook said it couldn't exceed 3.0. Who on earth actually measures grass with a ruler? And more importantly, who has that much time to obsess over someone else's lawn? What made it even stranger was the way Sharon handled it. Instead of mailing the citation like any normal HOA president, she delivered it herself, scribbled a nasty personal note on the back, and according to our neighbor Mrs. Peterson, who sees absolutely everything, stood on our porch for nearly 10 minutes photographing our lawn from every possible angle like she was collecting evidence for a criminal trial. Amanda's reaction was the first real clue that something about her wasn't quite what I had always assumed. Instead of paying the $85 and moving on, she sat at the kitchen table, studying the notice like it was a federal contract. She pulled out her laptop, opened a stack of browser tabs, and began jotting notes on a legal pad with the kind of laser focus she usually reserved for major work projects. "This is procedurally flawed," she muttered, highlighting sections with different colored pens. "The timing of the notice violates Texas property code, and there's no documented measurement according to state guidelines." I stood there watching my cookie-baking wife transform into a sharp, precise legal strategist overnight. "Honey," I asked carefully, "where exactly are you learning all this law stuff? From consulting?" She looked up, her face completely focused, radiating confidence I'd never seen before. "No, this isn't about the $85, she said firmly, her tone like steel. "It's about due process and legal procedure. This woman has already broken several sections of property law, and I'm not letting it slide." I had no clue what due process had to do with the height of grass, but something in her voice told me not to argue. The way she spoke sounded far too polished, too professional, for someone who just worked from home. That's when Sharon's behavior escalated from annoying to downright disturbing. When she realized Amanda wasn't going to back down, she lost control. Suddenly, Sharon was driving by our house several times a day, slowing down to glare at the property as if she were running surveillance. Mrs. Peterson mentioned that Sharon had even been asking odd questions about USA, what cars we drove, how we afforded our home, whether we seemed suspicious. What unnerved me most, though, was the way Sharon looked at Amanda. It wasn't ordinary hoe irritation, it was raw, personal, like Amanda embodied something Sharon despised but couldn't put into words. "And Amanda?" She remained calm, professional, almost unnervingly patient. when most people would have told Sharon exactly where to shove her ruler. Do you want me to keep the name HOA as it is, or should I also adapt it into something else, like association or committee, to make the script even more unique? You said, rewrite next section. Remember story mod jiz jagapa echo story lika iga apneas koana drama nest say change karna high judicial calm. That honestly started to creep me out a little. The whole neighborhood was beginning to notice the 6:53 tension. During our evening walks, people would whisper and point. Some folks sided with Sharon initially. After 6:59 all, rules are rules, right? But others, like the Robinson family and old Mr. 704 Green, thought Sharon was taking this way too far for a first-time violation when we'd been out of town. Sharon's 7:10 escalation decision was what really convinced me that something seriously weird was happening. She decided she 7:16 needed to teach this woman who's in charge around here. Even though she couldn't explain why she felt such a 7:22 personal need to defeat Amanda specifically, it wasn't about HO rules anymore. It was about winning some kind 7:28 of psychological war that only existed in Sharon's head. 3 days after the fine 7:33 arrived, I found Amanda in her home office late at night, surrounded by legal documents and case files that 7:40 definitely weren't the consulting work she usually did. When I asked what she was working on, she quickly closed the 7:45 laptop and said she was just researching HO regulations. But I caught a glimpse 7:50 of one document before she could hide it. It was a newspaper clipping from 8 years ago with a headline about some 756 major charity fraud case. There was a photo of a woman walking out of a courthouse, and even though it was 8:02 grainy, something about her face looked disturbingly familiar. Amanda stares at the photo, then looks out the window at 808 Sharon's house across the street. Why do I feel like I've met this person before? And why does seeing her make me feel so 8:15 uneasy? 1 week after that bizarre doorbell confrontation, Sharon's obsession with my wife reached a whole 822 new level that honestly scared me. This woman hired a private investigator, spent $400 of her own money to dig up 829 dirt on Amanda Rogers. Can you imagine being so consumed with hatred for your neighbor that you actually pay a 836 professional snoop to investigate them? The PI report came back squeaky clean, of course, because my wife isn't running 842 some criminal enterprise out of our suburban home. But when Sharon read that Amanda appeared to be a successful legal 848 professional with an expensive lifestyle, something clicked in her brain that she couldn't identify. 854 successful legal professional. Those words kept echoing in Sharon's head for reasons she couldn't explain. Mrs. 9 o'clock Peterson heard her repeating them while pacing in her backyard at night. Every time she looked at that PI report, she 906 felt familiar anger rising from somewhere deep inside, like an old wound reopening. She told her sister on the 913 phone that Amanda's type reminded her of someone who thinks they're better than everyone else, someone who destroys 919 people's lives for careers. But when her sister asked who, Sharon couldn't give a straight answer. She just knew 926 successful legal professionals made her want to punch something. Meanwhile, my wife was dealing with Sharon's rapid-fire 932 escalation like a complete professional, which should have been another massive clue about who she really was. After 938 that second fine, Amanda received violation number 3 just 4 days later, $275 945 for repeated violation plus administrative costs. Then came number 4 on day 12, $425 for property 954 maintenance endangerment, whatever that meant. Each time Sharon delivered these fines personally, her behavior became 10 o'clock more aggressive and confrontational, like she was trying to provoke some reaction from Amanda that never came. 10:06 Here's what really blew my mind. Amanda never lost her cool, not even once. She'd read each violation notice with 10-12 methodical precision, taking notes and cross-referencing legal codes like she'd been doing this her whole 1018 professional life. When I asked where all of this legal expertise came from, she just said her consulting work involved 1024 regulatory compliance. That explanation might have satisfied me before, but now 1029 I was paying attention. My wife wasn't just reading HOA bylaws, she was citing 1035 constitutional amendments and federal property codes that definitely weren't in any homeowner handbook. One evening, 10:42, I caught her on what looked like a work call, but the conversation didn't sound like normal consulting work. "Yes, I'll 1048 need the harassment precedents from the Miller case," she said quietly, "and pull anything we have on intimidation 1054 tactics involving repeat offenders." When she noticed me listening, she quickly ended the call and claimed at 11 o'clock ChatGPT said, "Here's the rewritten version of the next section, a story preserved, wording refreshed, no timelines, and I've kept it ready for the Anadroma-nest replacements whenever they appear later." Amanda's calmness had shifted into something almost unnerving. It wasn't just patience anymore, it was a kind of cold judicial composure that unsettled me. People in the neighborhood were starting to notice the tension, too. During evening walks, I could feel the whispers, see the glances. At first, a few neighbors sided with Sharon. Rules are rules, after all. But others, like the Robinsons and old Mr. Green, saw that Sharon was taking things to extremes over what was clearly a one-time violation that happened while we weren't even home. Sharon's response was what finally convinced me that this wasn't about rules at all. She decided Amanda needed to be put in her place, though she couldn't explain why she felt such a personal need to break her down. It wasn't about HOA regulations anymore, it was about some warped battle she had built in her head. The neighborhood had never seen anything quite like this. One retired judge even remarked, "In 40 years on the bench, I've never witnessed anyone handle such a personal attack with that level of professional composure." But the real shift came from Rebecca herself. After spending 3 days barricaded inside her home while protesters occasionally appeared on our street, she finally stepped out to give an interview to a local news station. Watching it was painful as she looked drained, broken, and far older than her 55 years. She repeatedly insisted that she had already paid for her crimes and was entitled to a fresh start. When the reporter asked about the children she had robbed of medical funds, Rebecca faltered, unable to give a clear response. Her voice cracked as she muttered, "I made mistakes 8 years ago, but Judge Rogers destroyed my life, and when I found out she was living next door, all of those feelings came rushing back." The reporter pressed her, but she was simply doing her job as a prosecutor. Why target her family? Rebecca's answer revealed just how damaged she truly was. "Because she looked at me like I was nothing, like I was just another criminal to push through the system. She never saw me as a persona, just someone desperate who made bad choices." That night, Amanda and I sat together watching the interview. I noticed the sorrow in my wife's eyes as she softly said, "The real tragedy is that Rebecca had 8 years to change, to grow into someone better. Instead, she's the same woman who stole from sick child Trina, just with a new name and another scapegoat." Later, before going to bed, I glanced out the window. There sat Rebecca on her porch, staring directly at our house with an unreadable expression. Deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of it. I was right. 3 nights later, at 2 a.m., my phone rang with the most terrifying call I had ever received. Amanda answered on the second ring, her voice tight with fear as she said, "Hello, who is this?" All we could hear was heavy breathing. Then Rebecca's drunken, desperate voice came through, "You destroyed my life once, and I won't let you do it again. I'm done hiding, Amanda. I'm done pretending to be sorry for something you forced me into." The line went dead. But when Amanda pulled back the curtain, we could see a figure pacing in Rebecca's backyard. Her house lit up like daylight. Amanda immediately contacted the U.S. Marshals. Federal judges keep a direct security hotline for threats like this. But then she shocked me. "I'm going over there," she declared, already pulling on her clothes. I tried to stop her, but Amanda's expression told me arguing would be useless. "No, I've dealt with people like Rebecca for 20 years. Sometimes the only way to end a volatile situation is to confront it directly." By 8 that morning, Amanda crossed our lawn and knocked firmly on Rebecca's door, calm and steady as if she were handling routine business. I watched nervously from our kitchen as Rebecca, still in the same clothes as the day before, opened the door with a disheveled, sleepless look. They spoke quietly, Amanda controlled and steady, Rebecca shifting between angry outbursts and tears. After 10 tense minutes, Rebecca stepped aside and let Amanda in. That sight unnerved me more than if she had slammed the door shut. Hours later, after interviews with the U.S. Marshals, Amanda told me what really happened. Rebecca had been drinking non-stop since the news interview, drowning in self-pity and resentment. She was convinced Amanda's presence in the neighborhood was some cosmic punishment aimed at her. She told me that seeing me every day was like reliving her worst nightmare. Amanda explained, she couldn't accept that I hadn't thought about her case once it was over, and that our move here was pure coincidence. Rebecca's perception was twisted almost beyond recognition. In her mind, she had been a desperate single mother forced to commit one mistake to pay her daughter's medical bills, while prosecutor Amanda Rogers had railroaded her to boost my career. She told Amanda that she had ruined her family, destroyed her marriage, and poisoned her relationship with her children. Amanda just shook her head. I reminded her that she had stolen from sick children for 18 months, and that her marriage had collapsed because of her gambling addiction and not me. But she simply refused to hear it. The most disturbing moment came when Rebecca confessed just how deep her obsession went. For 8 years, she had tracked Amanda's career, reading about her judicial appointment, even researching which neighborhood she moved to afterward. She didn't end up in our HOA by accident, Amanda said grimly. She chose this place because she knew I lived here. Becoming HOA president was her way of controlling my everyday life. My stomach turned as I realized Rebecca had been orchestrating this confrontation for years. But Amanda hadn't walked in unprepared. She carried a folder of documented harassment incidents, copies of escalating HOA fines, and even a card for a rehabilitation program that helped ex-offenders build new, lawful lives. I gave Rebecca a choice, Amanda explained. She could keep going down this road of blame and harassment, which would almost certainly land her in federal court again and back in prison, or she could accept real help and try to rebuild her life without the bitterness that's been eating her alive. Amanda had already prepared an option, a rehabilitation program run by a nonprofit she once partnered with as a prosecutor. They had an opening for someone with financial experience, helping former inmates manage their money legally. The salary was only $30,000 a year, hardly glamorous, but it was honest work with opportunities to move up. There was one condition: Rebecca would need to enter a full restitution agreement. That meant paying back the Hope for Children charity over 5 years and committing to 1,000 hours of community service with the very children's programs she had stolen from. What did she say? I asked, curious whether Rebecca had it in her to finally take responsibility. Amanda hesitated, then said, "She told me she needed time to think." But to broken bar, she also admitted something I'd never expected to hear. She said maybe she'd been angrier at me than at herself, and maybe that it wasn't fair. It wasn't a full confession, but for the first time Rebecca had acknowledged that her own choices, not Amanda's prosecution, were the cause of her downfall. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was glued to this unfolding drama, almost like a real-life Anna drama-nest episode. Home values had stabilized thanks to the media portraying our community as a place where problems were solved and justice prevailed. Still, the gossip didn't stop. Mrs. Peterson even launched a neighborhood watch specifically to keep an eye on Rebecca's house, while Mr. Green organized a fundraiser for Hope for Children that raised $12,000 in its very first week. The turning point came the next evening. Rebecca knocked on our door, holding a sealed envelope and looking more sober and clear-headed than I'd seen her in months. Amanda welcomed her in, and for 20 minutes they sat at our kitchen table, speaking quietly. Rebecca wept, not the loud, chaotic sobbing from before, but soft, steady tears, like someone finally beginning to accept the truth about their past. When she left, Amanda opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. Rebecca had agreed to join the rehabilitation program, accept the restitution schedule, and most importantly, she had written a formal apology to the children and families she had hurt. "She also wrote something for you," Amanda said, handing me a separate note. Rebecca's message was short, but powerful. "I'm sorry your family got caught in the crossfire of my anger. Your wife is a good person who was only doing her job. I hope one day I can show the same professionalism she has shown throughout this ordeal." That night, as we watched Rebecca packing boxes through her living room window, I finally asked Amanda the question that had haunted me since the beginning. "Do you think she can really change?" Amanda thought for a moment before answering. Rebecca Stone has been given more second chances than most people ever get. Whether she uses this one to grow or just finds new ways to blame others, it will decide who she really is. The next morning, we watched Rebecca's moving truck pull away. Our suburban nightmare had shifted into something far more complicated, a story about justice, redemption, and whether people can truly change once they stop running from the consequences of their choices. 6 months later, Amanda received a phone call that closed the chapter on our neighborhood ordeal. It was Rebecca, calling from Dallas. Her voice was steadier and more confident than ever. "Judge Rogers," she said, "I wanted you to know I've been promoted to program coordinator. They're letting me design financial literacy classes for women who've made the same mistakes I did." The transformation was astonishing. According to the director of the Rehabilitation Center, who also reached out to Amanda, Rebecca had thrown herself into the program with complete dedication. She had completed every counseling session, attended all financial responsibility workshops, and even volunteered for extra community service hours beyond what was required. Most importantly, she had been making her restitution payments faithfully, $200 every single month to Hope for Children, a meaningful sacrifice considering her modest salary. The salary wasn't much, but Rebecca insisted on keeping Ida proof that she wanted to live honestly this time. What impressed Amanda most was the update from the program director. Rebecca had finally stopped blaming the world for her downfall. For the first time, she was taking complete ownership of her crimes and channeling that guilt into helping others avoid the same mistakes. Within months, she became one of their biggest success stories, mentoring newly released women and guiding them through the terrifying process of rebuilding their lives without slipping back into crime. But the true test came when Hope for Children, the very charity she had stolen from, invited her to speak at their annual fundraising gala. The director had been following her rehabilitation closely and wanted Rebecca to share her story, not as a cautionary tale, but as proof that redemption is possible when someone is willing to do the work. Standing before wealthy donors and community leaders, openly admitting that she once stole money from sick children, was terrifying. But Rebecca accepted, saying that accepting responsibility meant facing even the most painful truths. Amanda and I went to the gala, unsure of what we'd see. The last time we'd stood across from Rebecca, she had been bitter and angry, pointing fingers at everyone but herself. That night, though, the woman who walked onto the stage was unrecognizably poised, composed, and deeply remorseful in a way that felt genuine, not staged. 8 years ago, she began, her voice calm but heavy, I stole $180,000 from this organization because I was drowning in gambling debts and too proud to ask for help. Her speech was brutally honest. She described children whose surgeries were delayed because of missing funds, families who lost access to tutoring, and staff members who lost their jobs when programs were cut. But she also spoke about the deeper transformation that happened during her rehabilitation at the moment she realized that her anger wasn't at the judge, the prosecutor, or the system. It was shame disguised as rage. "I wasn't angry at Judge Rogers for prosecuting me," Rebecca admitted. "I was angry at myself for becoming someone who would steal from sick children." The audience's response was overwhelming. People who had every reason to despise her stood and applauded. Major donors approached her afterward, asking how they could support the rehabilitation program that had helped her. An elderly woman whose grandson once benefited from Hope for Children even hugged Rebecca, telling her forgiveness was possible when someone truly earned it. Later that evening, Amanda, Rebecca, and I sat down together for coffee. For the first time, it wasn't prosecutor, defendant, and bystander, it was just 3 people sharing a table. Rebecca looked at me directly. "Noah," she said, "I owe you an apology too. You didn't sign up to live next door to someone carrying 8 years of misplaced rage. Your lawn never deserved that level of scrutiny." We laughed, an unbelievable sound considering everything we'd endured. But then Amanda asked about her future. Rebecca's answer was clear. "I want to finish paying back every penny I stole, complete my community service, and eventually start a non-profit to help women transition from prison back into society. And I want to say something that may sound strange. I want to thank you for prosecuting me 8 years ago. If you hadn't held me accountable, I might still be stealing today. Amanda's reply showed why she had become so respected. Rebecca, justice isn't about revenge, it's about accountability that creates the chance for change. You've proven that the system can work when people decide to work with it, not against it. That moment felt profound. Prosecutor and defendant, both changed by the journey, sitting together with respect and shared purpose. The most surprising development came weeks later, when our old neighborhood invited Rebecca to speak at the annual home meeting. By then, her story had spread across the community, almost like something out of a Nana drama-nest episode. She had become both a cautionary tale and a symbol of hope. Her presentation, titled From Embezzlement to Empowerment, Taking Responsibility for Change, drew people from 6 surrounding neighborhoods. She admitted her failures, spoke about wasting years blaming others, and explained how only when she reconnected with Judge Rogers as a neighbor did she finally confront the truth. The Q&A session afterward was remarkable. Residents asked tough questions about balancing second chances with community safety, how to know if someone was truly reformed, and what lessons neighborhoods could take away. Rebecca answered everyone with honesty. Trust isn't granted by words, but by consistent actions over time. Driving home that night, Amanda turned to me and said, "You know what strikes me most?" Rebecca had every excuse to keep blaming me, the system, and everyone else. Instead, she chose the harder path of accepting responsibility. That's why people are listening to her now. She chose the more difficult road, the one that required looking honestly at herself and making real changes. That's the key difference between punishment and rehabilitation. Punishment simply locks people away, but true rehabilitation demands growth, accountability, and becoming better than before. The final chapter unfolded when Rebecca completed every part of her restitution to Hope for Children and was offered a permanent role as director of their reentry and rehabilitation program. She had gone from stealing from sick children to creating opportunities that would prevent others from repeating her mistakes. It was poetic justice in its purest form, and not revenge, but transformation for the greater good. 3 years after the infamous meltdown that reshaped our lives, I was in my garage working on a transmission when I saw a familiar figure walking up my driveway. It was Rebecca Stone, who had legally reclaimed her original name after living as Sharon Allen. She looked nothing like the bitter, desperate woman who once patrolled our lawns with a ruler in hand. Instead, she carried a neatly wrapped package and wore the calm, confident smile of someone who had finally made peace with her past and built something meaningful from it. "Noah," she greeted, extending her hand with the same professional warmth Amanda had once shown the day she was recognized as a federal judge. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by unannounced. There's something I'd like to give you and Amanda." I wiped the grease from my hands and welcomed her inside, curious about what could have brought her back to the very neighborhood where her public collapse had unfolded. Amanda soon emerged from her home office, where she had been polishing the final chapters of her book on restorative justice, a project multiple publishers were already competing to acquire. The meeting between these two women was remarkable. Just a few years ago, they had stood on opposite sides of the courtroom, one as prosecutor, the other as defendant, entangled in nearly a decade of unresolved anger and guilt. Yet here they were now, embracing like old friends who had weathered the same storm and come out stronger. "I wanted you both to see this," Rebecca said as she carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a framed photograph from the Hope for Children Gala, where she had received the organization's annual Community Impact Award. The image showed Rebecca standing proudly with a group of former offenders who had completed her program. Each one of them was now employed, thriving, and giving back to society. What made the photo truly powerful, though, was the inscription beneath it: "To Amanda and Noah Rogers, thank you for teaching me that accountability leads to freedom, and for showing me that the hardest person to forgive is often yourself." Rebecca shared the results of her work, and they were astonishing. Her program had reduced repeat offense rates to below 12%, compared to the national average of 68% for federal inmates. Over 300 women had successfully finished her financial literacy courses, and 85% of them maintained steady employment for at least 2 years after release. The model had grown so effective that cities across the country were adopting it, and Rebecca had been invited to speak at major criminal justice conferences nationwide. But none of this would have happened, she admitted, looking directly at Amanda. If you hadn't prosecuted me all those years ago and later given me a real second chance, I spent years hating you, never realizing you were the one who saved me from becoming even worse than I already was. It was a profound moment. The once convicted criminal openly thanking the prosecutor and judge who had held her accountable while also guiding her toward redemption. Amanda, in her typical grace, responded softly, "Rebecca, you saved yourself. I only did my duty as a prosecutor," and later extended a neighborly hand. "Every choice to change, every payment you made, every hour you invested in helping other women avoid your mistake, that was your doing. That's what makes your transformation real, not just another act of manipulation." The mutual respect between them was moving, a proof that justice and mercy can work side by side when someone is willing to face the hard work of change. Our neighborhood itself had transformed as well. What once was infamous for scandal had become a landmark for people interested in criminal justice reform. Property values had risen by more than 20%, with real estate agents even promoting it as the community where accountability and forgiveness create lasting change. Mrs. Peterson had published a book about the ordeal titled "When Your Neighbor is a Federal Judge and Your HOA President is a Felon," which surprisingly became a bestseller. Mr. Green's fundraising campaigns for Hope for Children had raised over $100,000, turning our quiet suburb into one of the charity's strongest supporters. Each year, the neighborhood now hosted a Hope and Second Chances block party, where reformed individuals shared their stories of rebuilding their lives. What had started as bitter neighborhood drama had grown into a movement that embodied both justice and redemption. Rebecca also opened up about her personal journey. Slowly, she was rebuilding bonds with her children. Her daughter had recently visited her in Dallas for the first time in 5 years, and her son had begun returning her calls. "They're not ready to fully trust me yet," she admitted, her voice steady but eyes damp, "but they can see I'm finally taking responsibility instead of hiding behind excuses." That's progress. Most significantly, Rebecca had been released early from her supervised probation after exceeding every requirement. Her probation officer personally recommended early termination, citing her extraordinary contributions to the community. "For the first time in nearly a decade," Rebecca said with conviction, "I'm truly free, not just from probation or prison, but from the anger and blame that kept me trapped in destructive patterns." The room grew emotional when she spoke of the children she had hurt through her crimes. "I can never undo that harm," she said, tears shining but voice firm, "but I can dedicate the rest of my life to making sure no other child suffers the same way. Every woman I help stay out of prison, every program I build, that's how I honor them." Rebecca's final words before leaving stay with us. "Every woman I help avoid prison, every family spared from financial ruin, that's my true repayment to the children I harmed." It's clear she has discovered her life's purpose in ensuring others don't repeat her mistakes. Before heading out, she shares one last reflection that perfectly captures the journey we've all experienced. "The opposite of justice isn't mercy, it's the refusal to take responsibility. Mercy only works when someone is brave enough to face the truth and commit to change." Amanda, you gave me justice 8 years ago when you prosecuted me, and you gave me mercy 3 years ago when you opened a path forward. I needed both to become the person I am today. I watch from the kitchen window as Amanda walks her to the car. Their farewell is moving. Two women who had once stood on opposite sides of the courtroom now parting as equals, bound by mutual respect and shared purpose. They had been prosecutor and defendant, neighbor and tormentor, judge and rehabilitated citizen. Now, they stood as proof that transformation is possible. It strikes me that this is what true justice is meant to achieve. Not just punishment, but growth. A system where accountability leads to redemption, making communities stronger and safer. Later that night, Amanda and I reflect on Rebecca's visit. I can't help but marvel at how a story that began with someone obsessing over our law ended with that same person becoming a celebrated advocate for criminal justice reform. "Do you think her change will last?" I ask Amanda, genuinely curious. She thinks carefully before answering. "Recovery isn't a destination, it's a daily choice." But Rebecca has built a life centered on purpose, surrounded by people who support her while keeping her accountable. That's the kind of foundation where lasting change is possible. As I turn off the lights, I glance across the street. The house where Rebecca once stood screaming about judges and lawsuits now belongs to a cheerful young family. Their children laugh and play in the yard, replacing old bitterness with new beginnings. It feels symbolic: anger transformed into hope, dysfunction into growth, and a community learning that even the most unlikely neighbors can teach us lessons about forgiveness, justice, and redemption. And that's how a petty hoe grass dispute spiraled into one of the wildest neighborhood dramas you'll ever hear. If this story shocked you like it did me, hit that like button right now. This is Anna Drama Nest, and I'll see you in the next video where truth once again proves stranger than fiction.